Welcome, everybody. Event Marketing Redefined. I am your host, Matt Kleinrock, CEO of Rockway Exhibits and Events. Cool show today, right? Host events is something that I have seen a huge rise in, a huge uptick in since we'll say after COVID, right? It's like the whole Bible thing, like BC so at this point, right? But last couple of years, essentially huge uptick in it. Strategy for some companies doubling down on having already had a host event, some people creating like micro, smaller host events. So today, with us to discuss that, I have Lindsey Cohen and I have Katie Baker. Both Lindsey and Katie, they are both freelance event producers, event strategists, experiential event producers. We're going to give them the full treatment here. Previous life, they both worked together at Envision, at Sneak, which I thought was Sync. I was told it was Sneak, as directors of events, program leads, and such. Katie, Lindsey, welcome. Awesome to have you guys here today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, you guys are very welcome. I also think it's cool you guys know each other. You guys are friends. So I'm hoping to find a way to get you guys into a little bit of a tiff today. But I'm just kidding. Anyway, so talking about today is one of the things that we are finding is this idea that doing more with less. Event marketers constantly asked to do more with less. So, kind of the theme of this, how hosting your own event can drive more ROI, how to do more with less when you do it. So just to kick off, and I'll start with you, Katie, right? So in a world where everyone's being asked to do more with less, a lot of event marketers there, how can we kind of begin to make a case for hosting our own event, right? Like if a company's not hosting their own event, but they want to host their own event, what's a case that they can make to do that, or at least begin on a path?
Well, thank you again so much for having us. I think there is that question, the want and desire within an organization. And then there's also a question of like, if you are the one marketer or event person within an organization who has a great idea, how do you make the case internally when there might not be budget, there might not be buy-in? And Lindsey and I have worked on this a lot in various organizations, but truly starting from the ground up in terms of putting a strategy together. And it doesn't have to be an elaborate 100-slide deck, but truly thinking through strategy, audience, the value, even the budget, sort of all of the pieces. You have to, in order to get a seat at that table with executives in your organization who are going to approve of the idea, approve of the budget, approve of the resources, you really have to make a compelling case. I know we're going to touch on this later on. There is so much value, I think, as we all know, of just in-person events in general, but hosted in-person events from you get to control soup to nuts the experience and the value you are bringing to attendees. And I really think I'm struggling with this now with one of the organizations I'm working with. Defining the North Star and strategy is truly the key, and not having alignment there will cause so many problems down the road, from people coming in with other ideas of what they think the event should be, people coming in feeling free to make suggestions on how things should be done differently. Yeah. As long as you have truly the North Star of strategy and what value you are providing at this event, that is the key to success.
I love that I'm already going to derail this thing, and Pablo and Ish are going to be like, Matt, come on. But that answer's so good. So there's two things you said that I absolutely love that I think we have to touch on for people. One is you're talking about making a business case. Right? To me, that's such a high level event marketer thing to get the trust and get a seat at the table with leadership. Also, it's what you have to do to make sense to say, hey, I'd like to do this. Here is why, right? So I love the whole idea of business case. And I love what you're saying about North Star. Tell me a little bit more about the North Star of an event and having alignment throughout an organization before you kind of press go.
Lindsey, do you want to take that one? I know that is something we both have worked together on.
It's both like the bane of our existence and one of our favorite projects to work on together. I think alignment is the word that really coincides with North Star. We have been in companies where there is a lot that people are trying to achieve out of one hosted event. And an event can only be really one thing at its core, and that's that North Star that we've talked about. when you have, even just within an executive team, but when you get down on through other kind of stakeholders throughout the organization, when you have misalignment on those fronts, you are never going to succeed from the jump. You need to make sure that you've gotten everyone on the same page, everyone has the same rally cry, and everyone is marching towards the same end goal. Otherwise, the dollars that you're going to get to invest in this event are going to go haywire. You're going to splinter it, you're never going to have focus, and you're going to barely be able to achieve a little bit of all of the things that you set out to do. So I think it's both balancing the alignment up front before the event is even kind of kicked off from an operational standpoint, but also from a business strategy. It's always selling internally how we are using the company dollars wisely. Let's not just give me $2 million to run a user conference because we feel like we're at a point in the company where we have enough users and we should do one. It's how are we using it? Where are the dollars being invested and what can we expect in return for those dollars?
One of the things that Lindsey and I have repeatedly run into with owned events is the issue of trying to be too many things to too many people. And while events do have to achieve a lot of objectives, the more that we can hone down the true goals, the better, because when you have leaders across the organization coming to you with their own ideas for strategy and ways that you can achieve your goals, you really have to be able to point back to something. And where Lindsey and I have really had struggled and pushed back and a lot of push and pull in the past is defining the event and not trying to be everything to everyone.
Yeah, this is awesome stuff. Too many things to too many people. Absolutely love that. Do you guys have any sort of process that you've gone through to create North Star, to create alignment for either A, when you do not have an event and you want to create one, or B, when you have an existing event? Because I think a lot of people have existing events that really need an overhaul. So as quickly as one of you can, give me something in that area for process.
I'll do the creation from the ground up. Katie ran point on, evolving an existing event. So I'll give her that one. I think when you are at a point in the company's evolution and life cycle where you feel like you can create a user conference, as an example, it's really pulling together from like a workshopping standpoint or just like a brainstorming team environment, who those key stakeholders are that already agree with you. They're already aligned. They already see the vision and start to workshop through what the strategy is, bounce ideas off of each other and feel like you're going in to make this business case with a team of people surrounding you that are already on your side. So it's understanding who the key stakeholders are. Maybe some of them you work with daily, and that's an easy kind of hour that you spend together to build off that strategy that you've started to pull together, but also seek out the ones that might be a little bit more controversial, that are going to have different motivations, different goals than what you feel strongly about at that point in time, and hear them, truly listen, truly take in from their perspective what they want to get out of the event, and try to find kind of those overlapping concentric circles of what the event can realistically achieve.
Love that. Katie, you're going to do the existing event.
I will also add that, like, in terms of, really like specific tools, there are a lot of, collaborative tools like Mural and FigJam that have templates for workshops like this that are at least will give you a starting point.
What were the two that you named?
Mural and FigJam, which is a Figma product. They're collaborative whiteboarding tools that have a ton of different templates for various like brainstorming and collaborative working projects. So
that's cool.
They can provide a good starting point, so you're not like starting from complete scratch and can do a lot of the brainstorming virtually. In terms of taking existing programs, I mean, I think it's honestly like a lot of what Lindsey was saying. I think it's a lot of workshopping, a lot of connecting the dots. I think as event marketers, we sit in a really unique position to be the connector of dots across an organization, marketing, communications, social media, product, strategy, business operations, partners, like we are sort of the center point of all that. And so like Lindsey said, bringing those stakeholders together and sort of forcing alignment, like you as an event marketer kind of do have to become very good at facilitating and consolidating ideas and pushing people to conclusion and alignment.
Nice. I like those because I think that is difficult at times for people, right? So how do you do it? I think it's interesting on the one when you do have an existing event. I feel like it's almost easier, but maybe harder, right? It's harder because you have people stuck in their ways. You have people who are like, oh, this works. We've always done it this way. Oh, it's great, right? And then you have people who are like, I don't know about that. And you then have, I think you have a lot of data and feedback, though, that you can really bench things from and say, let's make changes off of that. Let's shift gears to a different question. So this question's more, I want to talk about kind of difference. I have seen people moving budget from third-party conferences into host events, right? Why do you think people are doing that? And essentially, what are you getting from a host event that maybe the third-party conference, not that it doesn't deliver it, but a host event is delivering better?
I mean, I'll just say it like a very high level. For me, hosted events, when I look at an entire event portfolio for a company, both third-party and proprietary events, it's always about using your dollars wisely. You only have so many dollars. And, you know, I can already hear people telling me, oh, events get the biggest part of the marketing budgets and yada, yada. Fine, but we still have limited dollars to work with in the sense of what we're being asked to achieve. So it's how do those dollars get invested best? And when I think about that, you know, a hosted event comes to mind in the sense of you have full control. You can target your audience extremely tailored. You can create experiences specific to those customers, users, prospects, whomever the audience is for that event. And it just gives you a lot more room to create in a very impactful way.
Yeah, I feel like just hearing that, like that's definitely, I'm a believer in that. I mean, it's like when you get to run your own event, you get to create this curated experience, right? You're creating a guest list almost in a way. I'm sure there's, events that are big enough where you don't, but essentially like you're getting your guest list, you're getting the control versus third party. I think a lot of the complaints I'm hearing from third party and trade show side is that they don't like the sponsorships. They don't think that there's value in them. They don't think, right? So there's all these things that they want better touch points. And running your own event really does that for you.
It does. And I will just kind of build off of that to say, you know, there is a place for third-party events. I think specifically when it comes to like newer or early stage tech companies, like a Series A tech company, they don't have a database to pull on to make that guest list. Like they don't have a big customer base to pull from or a user base. So going to a trade show is to get in front of your potential audience that you will then convert and start to nurture on your own. But once you have that audience, once you kind of hit a critical mass standpoint, that's when you really should reflect inward and say, should we host our own events? Would our dollars be better used elsewhere? Because we can curate an experience now and we have the database, the network, the community to do as much.
I think it's good to know kind of those triggers for when and, when not to. I mean, look, we do strategy, design, and build for third-party conference for people that are exhibiting. That's one of our core things that we do. So I'm not like anti third-party conference. I just wish that sometimes people would understand the same thing. What is your North Star when you're exhibiting? So it's the same thing when you're hosting a host event. Like, what's the North Star? Why are you there? What's it for? What's the purpose? It's like having that whole big picture conversation before you do anything should really guide and lead the way to kind of how you execute and how you approach moving forward. Let's talk budgeting a little bit. Budgeting, I hate budgeting. I don't even really like talking about it, but it's super important. It's a very important thing. So any sort of, these events, host events have big spends, right? Some of the larger ones. What are some sort of, I would say, maybe efficient ways tracking, deploying, utilizing budget? That you're both smiling, so I feel like you have something interesting to say. So go ahead.
Go for it, Katie.
Oh no, the Lindsey and I worked on an event together, or an event series together last year, where budget and budget management was a massive part of both of our jobs. And I think, like on a very technical level, it was tracked in Google Sheets. But I think one of the things that I took away from that very involved budget management experience was that communication and transparency were absolutely critical to the success of this event. There were countless stakeholders, both internal and external, who were utilizing the budget. And this was a series of international events. So it was in a variety of currencies, using different vendors around the globe. The internal team was using dollars for various marketing and other purposes. So there was being money spent left and right, as there is in every event. I think super tactically, Lindsey and I and some of the other key stakeholders were meeting multiple times a week, which might not be necessary, but was necessary for this program. We were meeting multiple times a week to review and sort of refine the budget. We had dedicated Slack channel for budget approvals so that every time someone needed to have Lindsey approve a spend, there was a little template that they would fill out, attach any quotes, and make it very transparent. So there was one Slack channel that we knew we could all go to for the latest numbers. And we had several roles dedicated internally, a dedicated budget owner who was making the actual updates in the spreadsheet, and a process that we had aligned on for once we got a quote in, then it went to Lindsey for approval, then the quote got put into the budget spreadsheet. It was a very involved process. Probably not all events need that involved of a process, but the transparency and communication, especially in this case with just the scope of the program, was absolutely critical to the success of like managing that budget the way it needed to be managed.
And I think just going back to the comment we made earlier about having a North Star from the jump and really holding everybody accountable towards that North Star, that reigns true for budget management.
Yeah.
I mean, we had very, very thoroughly kind of built out a budget once those North Stars had been decided upon, and there were dollars allocated in certain components specifically to achieve those North Star goals. So as we started to execute, we started to get differing opinions from stakeholders, and there became new misalignment, or let's actually shift our North Star from here to there, which means we have to shift our budget around. And while it's always going to change, nothing from an event standpoint ever goes as planned. We all know that. We weren't opposed to change. I think it's really when it comes down to invest your dollars, proportionally speaking, in the areas that will deliver that North Star result for you. So if it's a branding moment that you're looking for as one of your North Stars of your user conference, then you're going to have a lot more of your proportionate monies going towards branding opportunities, be it a wow moment, networking, community events, whatever it is on site, the actual signage. That's what it's going to go to, which might not be the same when it comes to, a meetup for executive community. That's just not what they need. They would rather have a high-end catering opportunity. So it's really kind of understanding your event, understanding the strategy, and understanding how the budget should reflect that.
Yeah, and I think having those conversations up front, Lindsey, to your point, when we say we are allocating this amount of money, for example, branding and signage, this is what that means. And these are the risks of not allocating even more, or here are the risks for, allocating less. And that was a big takeaway too, that like over communicating those line items, the budget, and the risks associated with those line items in relation to the North Star and, what is important to leadership, was key.
I mean, these are big budgets. These are big spends. Even if it's a smaller company spending $60,000 on a host event or something small, like a couple dinners. I mean, that money matters to executives. It should matter to the people deploying it. And I think what I'm hearing from you both is essentially, you're saying communication and transparency, right? So also investing the money into the North Star, that just screams to me alignment to executives. And then that, I think when you show process and you show alignment to the North Star with the money, then there's just confidence from the executives. It just becomes like, oh, wow, like they know what they're doing. They have full faith in what's happening. They're not asking a billion questions. It's not vague. It's not, there's no ambiguity floating around. it seems like a very dialed process when you get it to that point.
Yeah, and I think as it becomes a repeatable event year over year, month over month, whatever the cadence is, you start to be able to also pull on and lean on the data from the events. Yeah. How did that event perform to your North Star goals? And if you can show it in data, you're going to get more and more confidence placed in the events team, the budget, et cetera, for you to kind of continue to grow and evolve how you run those events.
All right, we're going to take a question because I like to reward questions. Otherwise, people will stop asking questions. Questions from Claire. Claire, thank you for the question. It says, have either of you used AI to help with the process of deciding whether to host an event or what route you should go down, et cetera, like what speakers should be invited?
I cannot say that I have, and I'm not opposed. I love using AI, let me just say that. But I think when it comes to some of those bigger picture strategic decisions, while maybe it would be fun to let AI inform that, it is a very case-by-case situation. It's going to depend on the specific group of stakeholders that you're working with on that event. If you took one event and replicated it at another company with a different set of stakeholders, I promise you the outcome will be different. So maybe this is my own skepticism, but I'm not sure I trust AI to inform that. I think that that's where event leads come in to really help like quarterback that conversation in a people first manner.
Nice. I think, Claire, I've not used it to decide on a host event, right? But just from my knowledge of it and from trying to gain as much as I can for events, I would say that you're utilizing AI in a way. Earlier, what Katie said, I think about Mural and FigJam, in the sense that it's helping you build something, right? So essentially you're using AI to say, hey, AI, you're an event planner and you're hosting, you have a bunch of engineers, like you give it all the information and then say like, what kind of dinner would you throw? Or what kind of speakers should be invited? Because if you're stalled out and you need a little bit of a think tank, I think AI is a way to kind of get a think tank going to maybe, generate some ideas. Another question from Mandy. Mandy, of course, we're going to take your question here. In terms of budget, do you try and maintain a balance between agency hire versus directly contracting vendors to limit yourself from a markup creep? Good question, Mandy.
This is an interesting question in particular.
Laughing again.
Yeah. So as Katie mentioned, her and I worked together many times. Most recently, I was in-house as a contractor and she was contracting for the agency that they had hired. So very specific use case, but in terms of your question, I think it's all about the balance. So there has to be a need that contractor in-house is really fulfilling for you on a very dedicated manner. And that is going to be, again, kind of a case-by-case basis. There are obviously agencies out there that have very tailored, experienced teams on hand to kind of pull into the team for that project. But if you feel strongly that there's like a large enough component of your event to have a dedicated contractor work on, by all means, I think that's a great option too. And Katie and I obviously have both been in-house, been a contractor, worked for agencies. So we've seen all sides of those tables. And I can tell you that it can be successful any which way you kind of slice it.
Yeah, I'll say that if you find the need for it might not be an agency with a team of 10 people supporting you, but even just the need for any additional support, I would say for, and this is like getting a little bit woo-woo and I'm not like a woo-woo person, but like for your own like overwhelm and like well-being, planning events, marketing events, being in our industry is a lot. Yeah. And I feel like we as people in our industry can just take on a lot. Like we know how to get it done. Yeah. We are going to get it done. And if you can make a case for external support, it is definitely worth exploring. Like Lindsey said, I have been both on the agency and in-house side. There are definitely cases to be made for agency support with a large team on a large conference or event or, large event series. But I'm also working in-house with a team that just has one event contractor who handles all of the, venue sourcing, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
So, there are many ways, like Lindsey said, that you can like slice it. But, again, like on the like protect your mental health and like life
Yeah.
and well-being, it is definitely worth thinking about if you think you can make the case for it.
I also think one thing I've noticed is that the bigger the event gets, the more hands that get in the cookie jar, right? So, and there's a lot of people that want a piece of this action, right? And everybody does everything, and everybody will sell you. Oh, I do. I mean, I'm an AV company, but I could build this and get this for you. They're just going to get somebody else, right? So it's a money grab at times, especially larger events. So I think you have to be very careful about who you bring in, how you build a team. And if you are going to, obviously when it's in-house, who's in-house and what they do. But when you go get people as contractors, I think you have to be say, hey, like, what are they alleviating here? Like, what are they taking and owning and alleviating from this situation? And what are they bringing to the table? Because even back to earlier, what you said, you can't be everything to everybody, right? So, and it is about controlling a lot of moving pieces so that you're not bearing the brunt of everything. So it's like building a business in a sense. Like you bring in people that can do stuff that you can't or do it better than you, essentially.
Yeah. And I think in many cases too, like our roles increasingly, especially with, larger events or just with a greater quantity of events on your plate, like our roles do become just that strategic internal leader who is trying to drive alignment internally. And like, if you find your role is becoming that and like you don't have time to do all of the other things that go into an event, it is certainly worth making a case for, Matt, like you said, really defining the help you need and the agencies or teams that can help you.
All right, we got another question, but Shazi, I'm going to hold it and I'm going to get back to it so I can make sure I keep us on track here because I have a habit of getting us off the rails. I want to get to attendee experience, right? Because I think that's such a big one. We kind of talked about these two different lenses, right? And we've talked a little bit about the first, which is business objectives, North Star, like what is supposed to be happening? Why is this happening? Now, the other piece is actually executing and creating an attendee journey, right? How do you align those two?
For me, it's core to what I've always done. I think, as an event manager, whether you're, an event manager that only owns like 1 or 2 events a year, or you lead the entire event portfolio, this is what you should always be thinking about. Like, what are the business objectives? What are my goals? What are my KPIs? What am I marching towards? Very holistically. But then for each and every event, it's like, what's that attendee journey? What is the attendee ideally coming to get out of this? And then where do they overlap? And I probably have already said it, but like concentric circles. It's finding the areas of overlap and then really doubling down on it. I think, optimizing for that overlap to make sure that the event achieves all that it's potentially capable of achieving, while also not making it try to be too many things to too many people. Because events are, a big budget line item. Sometimes in duration, they last multiple days and have various opportunities to add something here, co-locate this there. And while that's all well and good, and I'm truly a proponent of that whenever it's logical, it's still making sure that it comes back to that overlap. Is it achieving both the business objective and providing a good attendee journey, an experience? They feel fulfilled, they feel rewarded, enriched, and they're going to come back for more. Because if it doesn't do both of it, you're not going to solve anyone's wishes. Therefore, you're not going to get the budget to do the event again, or you're not going to get the attendees to come back to the event again, and therefore you then won't get the budget. So it's really taking the time and the thought around what the investment can best be put towards where there is overlap, because there's always going to be more that you could and want to do, but you really have to identify what is most imperative.
How do you both look at the customer when you're setting up this journey, right? Because like I have a really strong opinion on the sense. I think that like when you're selling something, when you're marketing something, which is essentially what events are, you have to have it's this line of empathy towards the customer. Who are they? What do they feel? What are the problems they have? How do they identify in the sense, you mentioned earlier, Katie, like event people, event managers, event marketers wear a badge of honor of they're busy, they're under resourced, they're overutilized, they have a million things going on. That scramble is a bit of an identity in the event manager. So it's saying, okay, I'm interested in, for you both, how do you turn those identities, use empathy to sort of then create an attendee journey so that when they're there, they're like, wow, like, man, they really get me. They see, they see me.
I think this will probably sound familiar to a lot of people listening, but, it's like the fundamentals of thinking about what do you want attendees to think, feel, and do before, during, and after the event. And like, it really comes down to those fundamentals. So workshopping that with all of your stakeholders should be a part of the process for sure. And I think like there are also doing some, whether it's internal or external sort of research or workshopping on like other, I guess, characteristics, for lack of a better word, of your audience. Lindsey and I worked for a design software company several years ago. That audience, designers and design leaders, did not want to be sold hard to at our events. Having a hard sell marketing message in a presentation or in a, panel discussion setting was not what they wanted to hear. They would check out. That is very different for, other technology leaders in IT or in development. You know what I mean? Like, you really have to understand how the attendees receive information, what kind of content engages them most, what kind of experiences do they like, in addition to thinking through, what, in terms of our goals as an organization, what do we want them to think, feel, and do before, during, and after the event.
I would take that one step further too. And I know that this is top of mind for everything Katie and I have ever worked on together, which is like, there's the goals from an attendee standpoint of how do they best like learn the information or want to be further trained in the product or network with their peers. That's like the business angle of it. But then it's also personal. Like, events are about people. Being empathetic is all about the people to people connection. And so we have to think about, when we go into a site visit, like, is there a room for someone to go and pray in, or nursing mothers? Like, is there somewhere where we can make sure that they can actually take impromptu meetings or calls, because it is a 2-day event and they do have a life outside of this event. So it's very much like putting yourself in that attendee's shoes. If they are going to take the time, make the investment, come to your event, you not only need to provide them the information from a company and product standpoint that they obviously signed up to get, like, that's why they're coming, but they also want to like meet their peers, have time in like a non-threatening, engaging way to just like network, socialize, have fun, like learn from each other informally. So it's really kind of taking all of the elements of like, if you were at an event, what would you want to do? What would you want to make sure was there? And that goes from like the biggest of details to the smallest of like those wow and surprise moments that are super minimal, but they always leave a lasting impact.
I really like the depth that you guys kind of took that there, right? Because I think too often people are like, oh yeah, we have a buyer persona and these who these people are. Like, I love going further than that, with what you talked about, Katie. Like, you were saying how, like, just this certain industry, this certain style conference, why they're there, what they're doing, the type of person they are, they don't want to be sold to, right? Like, that is something you have to understand. You got to have the pulse of the room, the beat of the people, what they are there to achieve, obtain, and why. Because then everything should be built around that to a degree. So it's not just a buyer persona. It's not just like, oh, it's a bunch of dudes, they're engineers, they're in their 40s and 50s. So like, oh, let's put a golf simulator, right? Like, it's not that simple. Like, you have to have so much more than that. That, I guess, for dudes, it could be that simple at some point, but you have to have like far more than that. You got to know why they're there, what they're doing, right? Like, how they feel about the situation. And I think, like, to the other thing, which, you said, Lindsey, like, it always makes me think, I always make a running joke at events and conferences. Essentially, it's like sometimes associations and, people running events, they are trying to like feed the water buffalo to the river. Yeah. And when you get to the river, there's crocs in the water and there's lions on the edge. Like, and it's like, it's not comfortable for people. Yeah. You know what I mean? They're literally saying like, I don't know if I want to go on the show floor. I don't know if I want to go into that lunch because it gets to be too much. And I think that thoughtfulness and empathy is a huge piece when you're running an event because people will recognize it and they will get the message, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the last point I'd at least make is that Katie and I, in all of the events we've worked on together, have made a point to like physically go through the attendee journey. Like once the event is far enough along in a creation standpoint, like walk yourself through physically in the attendee shoe, even if it's like sitting on a Zoom looking at the floor plan of like, I enter, what do I see? Where do I go? How do I know what to find? What is like the ease of my experience? And from there, we can make adjustments to make it more enjoyable, make it easier to navigate, make it more comfortable. So I very highly recommend kind of that level of like a early run of show pre-con style meeting to continue to like tweak and optimize for the attendee journey.
Do you guys have any examples of maybe things that you've done at host events or you've seen at hosted events that make them more memorable, or maybe things that you were just like, man, that was executed really, really good? Like any specifics that maybe would be helpful for people to hear?
I mean, I feel like a broken record saying this now, but it's almost always the best examples I can think of all have the same underlying theme, which is like making those spaces for connection. And Matt, to your comment, like I don't want to really tend to do like the one-to-one speed dating networking style, like let me set up business meetings. Because yes, people come there to meet each other, but that just feels like a really awkward first date that I don't want to go on. So at that point, I still want to provide those kind of informal moments to interact, to network. And as someone that's like rooted my background in hospitality through events, like that's going to center around food and beverage. So an interactive like coffee cart or a cool drink station at your happy hour, like give the attendees something to talk about in almost like an icebreaker, non-confrontational way that opens up the door for them to then actually have a meaningful business conversation once they've had that first level broach and they don't feel that level of awkwardness anymore. But it's the making the space and enabling the environment at your event to let people do that organically.
You know, as you were talking, Melanie asked, what are examples of creating connections? And then she said, she's giving great answers. Thanks. But I do.
You're welcome, Melanie.
But I do think it's a question, Melanie, that I'd like to go into, right? Like, what is an example? Like I wrote a note here that the best engagement at events foster connection, right? Because I think that's kind of what you just said. Yeah. And I believe that, but it's like, how do you organically do it? I've been pushing in a lot of different conversations that I've had, whether it's for events in my industry, events of our own that we're hosting, or events for clients, is this concept of like, how can you get people to sit down and talk about shit they care about, right? So it's typically done in smaller groups, not larger groups. People don't like to speak out in a room of 30. Tough to do. You're going to get 2 people that can't shut up, right? But if you can get like 5 to 7, so I've always had this idea like, okay, at an event, could you have a room that has 20 round tables at it? And each round table has like a floating card that has a topic there, and people can rotate and go and sit and have these discussions, right? Because at the end of the day, you are there for industry knowledge, right? You're all people, but that's how you get to know each other. So I think things like that. And then I think like I don't want to say impromptu, but like maybe things a little bit off the shelf, like, whether it's a coffee thing or whether it's a yoga thing or whether it's things that maybe people can do prior to the event that maybe they have an interest in, to help. I would love to know what you guys think, but anything you've done that has worked.
I honestly and I, Lindsey, am like the first person to like be like, oh, is this going to be so awkward if we put some questions on a sign on a table? Like, oh, is that going to be painful? But I have gotten feedback at numerous events that like, even though my opinion is like, oh, is this awkward to, have some icebreaker questions on signs at a table in the F&B area during breakfast, just to start conversations, to give people who are there alone a place to start. I've gotten feedback at multiple events about how helpful those were, just to give someone an in to start a conversation with someone else, because that initial like, oh my God, I've got my like fruit and muffin and I'm sitting down and oh, have to introduce myself to someone across the table can be really awkward for people. So to give them truly like a conversation starter is really helpful. And then Matt, to your point, Lindsey and I have both done a ton of executive events where we have done dinners for anywhere from 15 to 20 people. We've brought in a thought leader from the industry, someone who is recognizable to be the facilitator of the conversation. You know, we bring in conversation prompts, seed those beforehand, have this guest host stand up and give sort of 5 minutes of context, but then break people into smaller groups in this dinner of exactly about 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
And have them go through guided conversation. And again, for me personally, I'm like, oh God, is this going to be painful and awkward? But again, it gives people a place to start and really generates those conversations about both sharing your own experiences, but also like making recommendations for how other people can improve their sort of corner of the business.
You know, Katie, I even like the idea, like not even just using that in like a coffee session or things where, you know, to break ice, but like having a session that's like, this is what we're doing. So like you come here if you want to talk about these things because others do. And then essentially maybe garnering that from surveys prior. What are topics that you like want to make sure that get covered when you come here to talk about, and having a moderator at 12 of the tables and people can sit and come in. I've always thought that like people like to communicate in smaller channels in smaller groups and learn and feed off each other. And then when you're done at that table, you see that person at dinner and you're like, hey, like, oh, that was great. You said this, I have that same problem. Right. And now you're creating a little bit of a track there, which I think is really important.
Yeah, there's a company called Brain Dates, which I'm sure people have heard of, which does this professionally and well, and they have an app and a whole process and system set up. I know that can be a pricier resource, but you can essentially do your own version of that idea, not to co-op Brain Dates, but
I was just going to add one thing that I think Katie mentioned earlier, something that we've already alluded to the importance here, but like knowing your audience and playing that kind of how to build an environment for that specific audience. We've done, Katie and I together, a number of developer events, and, developers that are individual contributors are a very specific breed of an end user. And for me, one of the ways to like create that environment for a developer was during the networking time, we had rented arcade games for them to just like simply play, engage, meet each other in a very non-confrontational way that they enjoy. And it allowed them to start to have conversations organically. So it's obviously not the solution for your executive audience, and it's not the solution for your VP audience, but at some level, you have to think about like what resonates with this audience and what will make them feel at ease.
That's a really good suggestion, because like that competition always like gets people moving and grooving and talking to each other. Even like I participated in icebreakers in workshops where like really it is like a rock, paper, scissors competition that whittles down, and like even things like that like get people's juices flowing again. And I am the first to be like, no, I don't want to participate in that, but it really does get people talking.
Gets the people going. Melanie said, what are y'all seeing related to wellness? And Melanie, I think it's a really popular topic and how to do it. I think just personally, I mean, I go to a decent bit of conferences per year. I would love if one of the conferences that I attended were to bring in somebody, I don't know if people know like the gyms F45 and things like that. Like if they were to bring in like 2 or 3 trainers, open up a ballroom and say, hey, at 8 a.m., we're going to do a workout session, right? And to come in. Because for me, I'm always like, oh, I'm going to go work out. But then I get there and I'm like hanging out, having a drink, doing this. I'm like, I'm asleep in. I got to go to the hotel gym. But you know what I mean? So that for me would be something that's interesting. And if I was setting up an event, again, depending the audience and who they are, I might run something like that in the mornings and push back some of the stuff. So it's not this crazy early start and I could get a little bit of sleep. I could get a workout in, jump a shower, and then get to whatever has to be happening. That for me would be like awesome.
I would opt for like a make your own smoothie bar, but to each their own.
There you go. Sure. However you want to do it.
A couple of years ago, I have not seen this at other events, but attended an event that had a sound bath experience for all of the attendees. It involved sort of clearing out a ballroom in the hotel space, bringing in obviously like a sound bath expert to conduct the sound bath. They provided like blankets and mats for everyone to lay on. And I think it was like an hour and a half experience with everybody else in attendance. And it was very memorable and incredible.
Awesome. All right, let's jump. We got about 7 minutes here or so. What I want to talk about is in this attendee journey. I think it's such an important thing to talk about, but where do you see maybe younger event marketers, people making mistakes, like the opposite of mapping an attendee and journey and nailing it? Where do you see mistakes? Where are constant pitfalls? What are things that people should be mindful of to just avoid? You're both smiling again, to avoid and not do. What do you think about that?
I think time and time again, I see younger event marketers really just solving for business objectives and forgetting the attendee. And I think that feels reasonable in a lot of ways. I think there is a lack of mentorship in this industry, sadly, that it's hard to have a boss. I mean, I've had one or two bosses in my 14 years that is also an events professional. So it's hard to learn from others around you, which is why I love podcasts and forums like this for our community, but it's taking a narrow view on how you build and execute an event is the pitfall, like umbrella category. It's really not looking at it from different lenses, different angles, different perspectives.
Yeah, I think when you're young, you don't necessarily have the full view of what the role entails. And you think, oh my God, I'm going to get into event planning and that's going to be fun. But having to learn, I probably, and Lindsey, in my case, the hard way in some cases, the like true comprehensive, like strategy behind the event. And like I said before, really having to be the connector of the dots within an organization to make an event work. And like, I think the more that you can sort of expand, if you're working in a house, just like expand your horizon of the different roles within your organization, the different experts, the different leaders, and the different resources that you have internally that can sort of be your arsenal in like helping your event be successful. Yeah, the more successful you'll be.
The bigger the events become, the more important it does become for you to have those kind of stakeholders that you can rely on. And Katie and I have a similar way of running like larger scale events, which is creating work streams and identifying a work stream owner so that you own the event. You are the lead for the event and you are ultimately responsible for every single work stream under that event. But you know what? There's going to be someone in demand generation on the marketing team that can do a lot better of a job than you can with your limited capacity to build a bottoms up strategy to market to your database. So like give that to them. Touch base with them weekly or bi-weekly, but then make sure everybody else is marching to the same beat. And most importantly with the work streams is like bring everyone together. Make sure everyone hears each other because someone is going to figure out, oh, that's a cool idea that's happening over in that work stream. I could actually use that within what I'm doing and make this even cooler for the event, for the attendees, et cetera. So I just think it's knowing where your strengths are and then being able to like build a team around you to help execute accordingly.
Yeah, and like the fundamentals of like, whatever racy, Daisy, Darcy, like whatever sort of roles and responsibilities model that you use, yes, all of that evolves over the course of your event. And, people end up taking on things that they may not have been responsible for in the beginning, but like Lindsey said, outlining the work streams and outlining your roles and responsibilities are so, so, so key.
I think a big chunk of what I'm hearing just now and even before is like, approach and strategy. And then there's planning and execution, right? I mean, planning and execution is something that a lot of people are capable of. It's what a lot of people end up doing. But the approach and the strategy is really the next level. It's the difference maker. Then you can get to planning and execution. And there is a whole thing, when it comes to the way that you plan and execute, there's better ways of doing it. Of course, there's people who are more organized, better. You talk about work streams, owners of work streams and things like that. But without the approach and strategy, planning and execution, I don't want to say it's meaningless, but it could all be for nothing, unfortunately. Yeah. What kind of advice would the two of you have for young event managers, young event marketers, right? What would you tell them? Maybe corporate, first job, hopping in the saddle. I'm sure they're going to be given things that they don't understand and know how to do right away. What kind of advice would you give them?
Mine's twofold. It's one, know that it's okay to and be comfortable asking for help, because you're not going to know everything. You're not going to understand everything, and that's okay. And then the second part of it is, as you get comfortable with what's on your plate or what's kind of under your purview, ask for more, whether that's more responsibility or a seat at the table to listen on
I
something
love
that
that.
you're
Yeah.
curious about. Really just start to like broaden your experience firsthand or kind of on the sidelines, so that you can continue to grow and evolve what you're capable of.
Like that a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I would also say, sort of tangential to that, is like, and this goes past just our specific role, but like, it's all about relationships and developing relationships, being a good, trustworthy, reliable partner to those that you work with is absolutely critical. And like, again, like when I was young, like, oh, you hear people talk about your network and leveraging your network, and like, eye roll, what's a network? And like, I'm never going to have one of those, but like, you will build a network. Yeah. And I, Lindsey, I can probably speak for both of us. Like, most of our jobs have come through our network. And, I like those relationships you build, no matter how cheesy it might sound, like they will, make or break your success. So relationships.
You start working with people that can execute. You start working with people that have connections, that can get stuff done, that can do things at a high level. And you have to surround yourself with people like that.
Why do you think Katie and I have worked together so many times?
Yeah, no, it's great. And Joanna wrote in here, and Joanna, I just want to clarify. You said, I would argue that execution becomes the most difficult part. On paper, all looks easy. In reality, yeah, I wouldn't argue that it's not the hardest part. I would argue that execution is not the most important part, right? But I would say, yeah, I mean, they're all so important. I just think that the approach, and so many people do the planning, they do the execution without the approach and without the strategy. They go 2, 3, 4 years of executing trade show booths, events, host events, and they're not working. And they don't even know that they're not working, right? So essentially, you're like, I'm doing all this for what? When you do the approach and you do the strategy, then it makes that hard part that you're talking about, the execution and all that you go through to put on this great event, well worth it. And I think it's just a complete game changer. I want to handle one last question. Shazia asked a while back, she said, how did you make the shift from in-house to contractor? What are the pros and the cons?
I mean, I think building off of Katie's comment just now, it's like really leveraging your network. And Katie and I have very different journeys that have a lot of like overlap and similarities. But at the end of the day, it was just at a time in my life where I felt ready to kind of do things a little bit differently. And it's not to say I won't go back in-house, but for now, being on my own and taking contracts on a as desired basis is a really fun place for me to be.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I think there are obviously pros and cons to both sides. I think what's really nice as a freelancer contractor is, having somewhat of an emotional distance and a political distance from everything happening internally. But same, that's not to say I would never go back in-house. There's a lot of opportunity out there, especially sort of in this like weird job economy world that we're living in, where there's a ton of work that needs to get done. So there are freelancers and contractors to do it.
And Shazia, I would say, because we work with agencies, corporate companies that do these events, and we're part of, the too many cooks in the kitchen, I can tell you that we've worked with people that are contractors, and we've been halfway through a job. I don't even know that they're contractors. They're so engulfed in what they're doing. So I think being a really good contractor, you almost wouldn't even know sometimes. All right, everybody. Awesome show. Lindsey, Katie, thank you guys both so much. You guys are fun. You guys are knowledgeable. You've put on some awesome events. I think you brought that today. The chat was great. To some of our regulars, thank you. To some of the new people, thank you. Super fun show. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Lindsey, Katie, thank you both so much. You guys were great today.
Thanks,
Matt. Thanks, everyone.
You got best webinar series ever from Lisa, ever. which means that you guys have elevated me and this. You've made this better. You're the best ever. That's awesome. Thank you guys both so much. Thank you, everybody who showed up. We appreciate it. And we will see you live in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.